Meanwhile, let me speak to somebody who perhaps has a slightly different view on this. Debbie Hayton is a transgender activist and teacher and joins me now. Debbie, very good morning to you.
Good morning, James.
Look, there are some who said that I, made an absolute hash of yesterday's discussion. What did I get wrong?
Well, I think what you said before about it being a complex issue, in some ways it is, but in some ways it's a very simple issue that there are two sexes, there are male and there are female. And what you got wrong was forgetting that and concentrating on something else, which I think is called gender identity, which is unclear and is ethereal, and I think has caused huge damage to trans rights over the past 10 years. We need to refine trans rights in reality, not on this fantasy.
Okay, so are you telling me then that the people who are defied trans, so say, for example, if one goes to the people who are experts, because a lot of people will say, look, if you don't feel like you know very much about trans people, they start off, and this is Stonewall, lots of people don't. And the thing is that if you are not something, then you probably, or you don't know something, you probably don't know very much about it. And yesterday, I was trying not to use the wrong language because I don't want to offend people unnecessarily. And I'm not a great expert on trans, but what I do understand is that for a very small number of people, their lives have been made living hell because of the attitudes of others who are very vehement in their views and their opinions on it because they don't think it's right or should be allowed.
Well, I think we need to go back to the root cause of this. Go back 10 years and trans people existed. We were fine. We were getting on just fine. And then along comes this ideology that says that we can be whichever sex we like, that trans women are women is its rallying call. Along comes this ideology. And we're trying to base rights on fantasy. And as soon as we start doing that, people get uncomfortable, people lose confidence in the system, and people start defending their own position. And I do not blame women for defending their own position. If any man can say, I am a woman, you've got to let me in, then women's boundaries become meaningless. That's plain for everybody to see.
Well, I totally understand that. But then I'm not sure necessarily that that's exactly what trans people are arguing for. But then I get it. But say, for example, how does one then respond? So the stars of Harry Potter have made their statements about all of this. So Daniel Radcliffe, and some would say, well, he's a bloke, so what does he know? But he said, transgender women are women. Any statement to the contrary erases the identity and dignity of transgender people and goes against all advice given by professional healthcare associations who have far more expertise on this subject than either Joe or I. So that was his comment. And I get it, I understand it. Emma Watson, so she says, trans people are who they say they are and deserve to live their lives without being constantly questioned or told that they aren't who they say they are. She wrote, adding to a subsequent tweet, I want my trans followers to know that I and so many other people around the world see you, respect you and love you for who you are. So both of those comments are slightly contrary to Joe Rowling's explanation, which in large I sort of get, but there are bits of it which I find deeply uncomfortable. But then why has this become so toxic that we can't have a proper conversation without people being called out? And all the stuff that has arrived at me on the old Twitter is just horrendous.
Well, it's what those actors were saying. It seems to me they're trying to protect their own backs. They didn't want happening to them what's happened to J.K. Rowling, i.e. being cancelled, being disinvited, having awards taken back from them. This is what's been happening, and I can quite understand why youngish actors are trying to protect themselves. But what they're saying is nonsense. Women are female, trans women are male. Male is not female. We are different. And to deny that is to deny reality. And this is what we've been trying to do, and this is why we've got a problem.
So trans people in the UK, though, they do face a huge level of abuse and inequality. And I guess what I was talking about with Kellie-Jay yesterday is that if you take her views and you move away from what she was telling me on air, if you move to what she's said and has been quoted as saying and is filmed as saying off air but on YouTube, she doesn't seem to agree with any aspect of trans at all.
Well, look, you had Kellie-Jay on yesterday and she could speak for herself. But I want to go back to what I think, which is that we need to refine trans rights in reality, and then we can perhaps get somewhere. I do take issue, actually, what you said about trans people facing oppression and marginalisation in British society. I don't think we do. I think we suffer in the same way that other people do, but we have huge rights. We've got the same rights as everybody else, and a few more besides. This idea that we face extra pressure and oppression, it's not my experience at all, and it's not the experience of trans friends of mine.
What about 2 in 5 trans young people have attempted suicide, and 1 in 8 trans people have been physically attacked by colleagues or customers at work? That's a fact.
Do you have the source for that information? Most of it comes from self-reported, uncontrolled studies, James.
Okay, so as somebody who is not connected to this, so I'm trying to navigate my way through this without either offending or upsetting, but also trying to understand, well, what is the best way to respond to this? Because my problem is that as soon as I speak, I'm told that I'm middle class, white, and a bloke. So what do I know? And therefore I can't enter the conversation. And then if you have a look at the timeline here, I'm told what female or what women have, which I'm well aware of. But apparently, a woman is a woman and that's it. And there is no further debate or discussion. But that seems not to be the case, because you speak to anybody under the age of 35, they'll have a completely different view.
Well, lots of people have got different views, but there's one reality and one truth. And a woman is a woman. A woman's an adult human female. That's the way we've always defined it. And that's the only definition of woman that doesn't involve sexist stereotypes or circular reasoning. People can believe what they like, but it's when we start trying to base rights on beliefs, that's when we've ended up with a problem.
So
because
is everything
beliefs do we,
okay? So
do we
is
accept?
everything fine? Okay, so is everything that is then written about in terms of trans rights and what we should be doing and how we should be referring to people and the names or the gender assignation and various other things, is all of that wrong advice?
Well, people should be free to think and say what they like. The problem is that people don't feel free to say what they like, or else you can imagine that.
Well, they're clearly not, because if you have a look at what's the stuff that's been aimed at me, I'm not free to say what I like and what I feel. And the thing is that as somebody who looks at this from the protection of a minority, just because a majority thinks something, it doesn't necessarily mean that the minority doesn't need to be protected. Now, you're telling me that as a trans person, no thanks, I don't need help from you, and that's fine by me. But there are a lot of people who might not necessarily agree with your view, I'm assuming.
But we need to base rights, as I keep going back to this, we need to base rights on reality and truth. So trans people need to be protected, but we don't need to be protected by an ideology that just isn't true, that says people can choose to be the sex they want to be. That ideology has damaged women's rights. It's also compromised the safeguarding of children, which is a completely separate argument to what we've been discussing here. And together, they've caused people to lose confidence in the entire system, and that's why we've ended up with the mess that we're in.
But then we also end up in a mess when a lot of the tropes that were used to describe gay people back in 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever it was, are still being used by some about those who are trans. I'm assuming that there are trans people, well, we know there are, but there are trans people who, for whatever reason, will, or whatever feelings they may have, or however one wants to define it, there are trans people in society, and we've got to find a better way to deal with it rather than just accusing anybody of anybody who perhaps dresses in a certain way as being a transvestite and having some kind of perversion.
Well, the problem with this ideology, it's opened us up to this. If any man can say that I identify as a woman and demand access to women's spaces, then women, it's reasonable for women to be suspicious of all of us. That's what that's women need to do that, to protect their own boundaries, protect their own spaces. I understand that.
I understand that, but then what I'm trying to work out is, how do you not marginalise the person who genuinely, they might have a physical form of a man, but they might not be male. Are they still male?
What do you mean about the physical form of a man who's not male? There's two sexes. We're animals, the same as any other mammal. There's two sexes, James. There's male and there's female. And me and you are male, and the women are female.
Okay.
This
all right.
is
I take a definition, because I'm going to refer to expertise which is far greater than mine. Clearly, it's important to remember that being trans isn't about having a particular appearance or particular body parts. It's about something that's absolutely core to a trans person's identity and doesn't alter whatever their outward appearance might be.
Well, that's meaningless twaddle, isn't it? I don't know where you got that from or whose authority that is, but it's totally meaningless. What you're doing is you're subverting the entire concept of biological sex, which is the reason why we're here.
Okay.
It's this nonsense that's got us to the problem that we're in.
Right. So do I need to be better educated on this? Do we need to have proper conversations? And just finally to you, or do we need to go back to the people who are writing this stuff? And they are some of, I don't know, some of the charities who are there to help trans people. Maybe they're not helping them then.
We need to spend more time listening, and we need to spend more time talking to each other. One thing I usually say to people in your position, James, is who told you, who told you this, and why did you believe them? Because we've all got a brain. We all have that common. We've all got a brain. We can all work this out for ourselves. And there are truths which we've known since the dawn of time, which have not gone away.